Good evening, everyone. This is meeting number 2630 of the Caledonian Philatelic Society, and I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Mr. John Matthias, who is going to give us a lovely talk, I am sure, on the Statue of Liberty. So welcome, John, and please feel free to start whenever you want. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Maureen. Hi, everybody. My name's John, and delighted to be with you tonight. I'm not exactly sure where you're all based. I know it's up in Scotland. I had a reminder pop up. There's this at the moment. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I have this phrase that we are outsourcing memories, and so I rely on Facebook and various other apps to tell me where I was at a certain time. And I had some memories pop up just today and yesterday, reminding me that 6 years ago I was in Glasgow at a conference.
And back in Glasgow.
And one of the reminders was actually I went to a football match. I went to see Celtic play. It was a dire 0-0 draw on a freezing cold Wednesday night, which is mainly memorable for just how creative the swearing was from the Celtic fans around. Some things just stay in your memory. But that was good. The best bit of the night was a pie, I have to say. But if I can share screen, then I'll start presenting. Just to introduce myself, I don't know I don't know that many of you. I am part of the British Thematic Association, and I did give a presentation about this back in, I think it was about a year ago. It might be March last year, or it might be more than that. So apologies if you've seen it already on YouTube or if you've already heard me give this talk. It's going to be very similar. And I have to start out by saying, although I'm a member of the Thematic Association, I'm a bit of a black sheep in that organization because I'm not really a thematic collector or presenter. I'm a topical collector, really, because I collect the Statue of Liberty on stamps and also, a few other bits and bobs around the Statue of Liberty. But so if it's a stamp with a Statue of Liberty on, I tend to try and acquire it, and so that doesn't necessarily mean I've built a thematic exhibit, as it were. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this talk to take you through a few aspects of my collection, things I think are reasonably interesting. And we'll start off with this because I collect the Statue of Liberty on stamps. I don't mind collecting random things like this, which is a souvenir packet which they used to sell if you went to visit the Statue of Liberty. And it's quite interesting. You get different ones of these. They were produced in the 70s. They were produced in the 80s as well, actually. And depending which ones you buy, you get different stamps in there. And sometimes you get some quite interesting older stamps in there. And sometimes it's all the stuff that you see all the time. And sometimes they're heavily cancelled. And, some of them have really been through the mill, those stamps. So but it's quite interesting. I've got a few of these packets, and it's just interesting to see which different ones end up in it. And I've done a sort of a nod to proper philately here by listing what the numbers are there, or in that. And because there's a variety of them, you could actually show, or I could actually show a few of these, but I'm not going to, because actually that wouldn't be that exciting, would it? So basically, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to the Statue of Liberty, and where it came from, how it came about. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think the Lady Liberty appears on so many stamps, because as a choice, as a design choice, it's quite interesting. And sometimes it appears on stamps where it's not really relevant, but it's used anyway. And then I'm going to talk about some personal connections to my collection. And also, I don't know, this is a little competition. You may think you know the answer to this. You may know the answer to this. But can you name the first stamp to feature the Statue of Liberty? And I realize everybody's on mute, so you can't jump in and shout your answers. But if you think you know what the first stamp to feature the Statue of Liberty is, do put your answers in the Zoom chat, and we can see see who knows their Statue of Liberty stamps. I'll give you a clue. It is an American stamp, but that clue itself might be a red herring, and the answer will be revealed later in the presentation. So this is just kicking it off. This is a picture of me and my wife, Kathy. We visited the Statue of Liberty in March 2007. The weather was freezing cold, which is why we're wearing coats. And I sort of have to mention my wife at the start of this because she was the impetus why I first started sort of putting together a collection of stamps featuring the Statue of Liberty. She went to visit it without me a couple of years before this. And while she was away, I thought, I wonder how many stamps I've got knocking around with the Statue of Liberty on. And I put them together, and there were more than I thought there would be. And I thought that was quite interesting. And then I made the fatal mistake of going onto eBay and doing a search and realizing there were lots. And that's where the collection was born from. So very much she was the person to blame. We all need somebody to blame for why we're collecting what we're doing. So what is the, why is there a giant statue at the entrance to New York Harbor? So it was a gift from the people of France. This was the Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World, to give it its full name. And it was funded by donations in France. This is one of 4 miniature sheets produced by Nevis for the centenary of the Statue of Liberty in 1986. You see a lot of miniature sheets like this that were produced in 1986, produced from a number of different places, mainly islands like Nevis and places like that, and Tuvalu and places. And some places released up to 9 sheets. I picked this one because it shows the president of France and the president of the USA at the time that the Statue of Liberty was given across. But there is a range of, basically all these miniature sheets have different US presidents on, right up to Ronald Reagan, who was in post in 1986 at the centenary of the Statue of Liberty. So if this was a centenary, then you know that it was actually given to the USA or given to the people of America in 1886. So the guy behind it, interesting fella, Frederick Bartholdi. He was obviously a French guy. He was a sculptor. He had a gigantic visit. So one of his first large sculptures was in a place called Belfort, and it was to commemorate the siege of Belfort during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. And he commissioned this gigantic lion. And you can see it on this stamp. It's sort of looking over his, I guess that's his left shoulder, but if we look at it, it's on the right-hand side of the stamp. And it's 22 meters long and it's 11 meters high. And this lion was sculpted from sandstone blocks. And he finished this in 1880. And he already started on his next project because he wanted to create something that would rival the Colossus of Rhodes, which of course you'll know is one of the ancient wonders of the world. It was a giant statue that stood in the harbor at Rhodes. So he wanted to do something like a modern day Colossus was his thought. This is, as a side note, Bartholdi actually achieved an important philatelic first because this stamp, which was issued in 1985, commemorating him and, you know, in the run up to the centenary of the commissioning of the statue, it was actually the first USA stamp designed using computer software. So here's a contemporary article about it from one of the stamp magazines, and there's a very long sort of this description in this of what exactly the designers did and how they used this computer program to superimpose this picture of Bartholdi on the photo of the Statue of Liberty by dusk. And they go into great details and length about this. And really, it's quite amusing now because this is the sort of stuff that people do on their phone without even thinking about it. But back in 1985, this was a big deal. And you know, so it is interesting to think that, you know, quite a few years after he died, Bartholdi actually was, you know, the subject of a sort of important sort of visionary step, really. This idea of the change in sort of computer aided design, the change in stamps, and obviously we all know stamps changed in the 1980s and never went back. But he wasn't alone. It wasn't just Frederick. He was accompanied by a famous engineer, a chap called Gustave Eiffel. And you may have heard of Eiffel. He built a rather famous tower in Paris. But to create the statue, he teamed up with Eiffel, and Eiffel created the iron framework inside the statue, supports the copper outer skin. Now, previous to that, they were wondering how they were going to do it, and there was suggestion that maybe they'd fill the statue full of sand, or they'd do something. They'd have to do something to keep this thing up together. But he put together the structure. You can actually see the infrastructure. It's on the left-hand stamp as you look at this. This was issued for the centenary of the arrival of the Statue of Liberty in America. In actually, I think you see 1885. You can see there's they've put the outline, the sort of framework for the statue in between Bartholdi and Eiffel there. And you often see both these landmarks feature on stamps. They do, so people decide to do like landmarks from around the world or whatever. You don't always get them on the same stamp. You do sometimes get them on the same stamp, and this is an example of a stamp featuring both of these. This is a stamp that was issued by Saint-Pierre et Miquelon, and it's there was these two pilots who tried to fly across the Atlantic and didn't arrive, but they were aiming to go from the Americas to Paris, or to France. And so, what do you use to describe that? Well, we'll have the Statue of Liberty on one end. We'll have the Eiffel Tower on the other. So you do sometimes get them both on the same stamp, and certainly if there's a set of stamps featuring world landmarks, the likelihood is both of those will be in there. So technically Eiffel gets two of those famous landmarks that appear in every set like that. Another person who was quite instrumental in making this happen was a chap called Joseph Pulitzer. You may have heard of the Pulitzer Prize. He was a newspaper publishing. He owned a newspaper. I don't know if you ever reached the status of publishing magnate, but he did own a newspaper called The World. And basically, the statue was being funded by donations in France. It was being built, people putting their time into it over there, but it needed somewhere to be based. So they needed to build the base for it, which is a large star-shaped base on what is now known as Liberty Island. So Pulitzer decided that he was going to fundraise for this. He used the newspaper to really drive this. He solicited donations. They located an island. It was a little island called Bedloes Island at the time, or Bedloes Island, and it just in the harbour of New York City. Over 100,000 people from across the United States donated to build this base on it and to make this sort of place for the statue to be placed. And again, another one of those Turks and Caicos stamps. Pulitzer, I put a little arrow on that, which is the kind of thing you can do in a PowerPoint presentation. Put a little arrow pointing to him. He's on there. There was a whole group of fundraisers, people who promoted this and really sort of pushed for it to happen. And Pulitzer's on that stamp as well. And the purple stamp there from the USA was commemorating the centenary of Pulitzer's birth, and obviously they put the Statue of Liberty on that because that was one of his main achievements in life, as well as the prize that bore his name. So that's the kind of team of people sort of involved in it, and so we have so how did it actually get constructed? Well, it took over a decade to build and complete. Bartholdi sculpted the figure. He based the face, which you can see on this postcard here. He based the face on his mother, but he sculpted the body based on the body of his wife, which does lead for some perhaps confusing ideas. I don't know whether we have any psychologists in the room, but that's always strikes me as being slightly weird, really. But anyway, he completed the face and the arm holding the torch first. So the statue was built in France between 1875 and 1880. And like I said, these postcards show elements of the statue on display in France. They were also shipped across to America. So the torch was on display in Philadelphia and in New York for some time before the statue was actually constructed. Again, that was done as a way of raising funds to get the thing built. So the actual construction process, this was sort of remembered on several stamps released to commemorate the statue's centenary. I think these ones from Penryn are actually quite interesting because I think those are actually photos of the statue under construction, which is quite interesting photography, still a very new science at the time. If not, they are engraved drawings. I'm not exactly sure. The ones on the left are sort of artistic representations. And these sets were released again to celebrate the statue centenary around about 1986. So, there's loads of like material out there. Just about every country in the world commemorated it. Certainly, if they needed an excuse to put out a stamp set, that was a good excuse for them to do it. So some fun facts about the construction. It's the largest copper structure in the world. It uses 91,000 kilos of copper. Most of that was actually located from Norway. It's 46 meters tall, but from the base of the pedestal to the tip of the torch is actually 96 meters. And we would now recognize the statue as mainly having a greenish tinge. And I can't remember who it was, but someone had some photos of the statue in the background, when they came online onto the Zoom call. That picture of the statue, that sort of like vivid, oxidized green is what we all know as the Statue of Liberty. But actually, of course, that's because the copper is slowly oxidizing, and originally the statue was brown. So, and you see that on some early postcards and early depictions of it. It's a large brown statue rather than a large green statue. But certainly by the certainly after about 40 or 50 years, it was bright green, and that's what it looks like now. And another interesting thing is Liberty Island. I mean, I think this is quite interesting, but Liberty Island is actually nearer to New Jersey, and so rather than New York State, because of where it's positioned in the waterway. And that has actually resulted in New Jersey trying to claim the statue as actually it's built in New Jersey. It should be our tourist attraction. So a special law was passed to say that Liberty Island belongs to New York, despite being in New Jersey's waters, as it were, territorial waters. So the state line is further away, but so Liberty Island technically, I think, is what's known as an exclave of New York State, because it's actually completely surrounded by water belonging to New Jersey. And actually, on Liberty Island, it's only the part of the island that's above the waterline. So if there ever was, a massive amount of climate change and the waters rose and covered the surface of Liberty Island, the poor old statue would change ownership, because technically the island wouldn't exist anymore. So there's something interesting there. Or if it fell over, I suppose it would fall into it would be New Jersey salvage. So that's quite interesting. There was an interstate or intrastate squabble over who actually owned it, all based on that fact. Well, also, and this is another interesting thing, I think, that Lady Liberty's torch is quite an important feature, because that's what qualifies it as a working lighthouse, and it is actually used as a navigational point for ships coming in and out of New York Harbor. Now, this stamp from 1978 is a close-up of just the torch, and it was replaced, and this torch was actually replaced in the centenary edition in 1986 because it had been so badly corroded. And that, I'm afraid, it's things like that, and this is something I'm sure you'll all recognize, because we are detail people generally if we collect stamps. It does mean that any kind of period piece set in New York where they have pictures of the Statue of Liberty, I'm sitting there going, well, that's wrong, because that's got the modern torch on it. And I'm one of those annoying sort of pedants, really, when it comes to that sort of thing. And certainly there was an episode of Doctor Who where they had a big deal about the Statue of Liberty and everything. And I'm just sat there going, well, that's not right, because it's supposed to be the 1930s, and they've got, it's got the modern torch on it. A lot of people don't realize that it changed, but the original torch, heavily corroded, has actually been put into the museum. You can see it if you go to Liberty Island and have a look. This particular stamp, I mean, one of the interesting things about collecting sort of just an item on stamps as opposed to sort of philatelic history is you end up with all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And I just think there's something quite amusing about a stamp relating to the Statue of Liberty being used on a warranty card for a gun. This is obviously sent to Dan Wesson Arms, and very famous sort of gun manufacturer. Someone decided to buy it says there what they're going to use it for. This is a guy in the National Guard. He's going to use it for hunting and self-protection. He bought it. He's a biologist. He bought it in a gun store. We know all this guy's personal information, and this guy, his personal data has not been protected at all, because there was a stack of these cards for sale on a stamp stall somewhere. And I don't think it says what type of gun it is, but the thing that makes me laugh the most about this is that he's ticked the box to say he's read his instruction booklet, and not being the kind of guy who's ever bought a gun, I didn't realize they came with instruction booklets. You know, so but I guess they must do. I mean, you need to clean it and everything else. Just a great insight into what the kind of things that gun owners have to do. But it does amuse me a lot, really. This is that's on there, and like I say, this is just an interesting piece then for the collection, because it's got a stamp featuring a part of the Statue of Liberty on it. Again, this is another thing just featuring the torch. This is a postcard, a prepaid postcard that was produced for FIPEX. And I have some examples. I have a few examples of this that obviously the Rhode Island Philatelic Society had bought a large quantity of these. They used them to mail out to their members. I've got several that were sent to Frederick A. Hawkesby. Can't remember where I picked them up from. But this is an example of a notice of what they're going to be doing in the Philatelic Society, and you know, the spring dinner. It's it's on there on it's going to be on May the 6th. It seems a bit late for a spring dinner, that, but there you go. And they're going to be having ham at their spring dinner, and that's $2.25 for dinner back in 1956, I think. Whenever that was sent, but the date was on it. Anyway, well, it would be after 1956, because that's when the postcard was issued, so it's probably sometime in the late 50s. But that's just, again, the kind of weird little thing you can include in this sort of thing. Okay, so why is Lady Liberty so popular? Why does it appear on so many things? So far, I've managed to collect 398 different stamp designs from 97 issuing countries or postal administrations. Some of that material, in addition to, it's not all stamps from those 97 countries. Some of them are postmarks and postal stationery and meter mail. So here's an example, some meter mail. This was sent to me by somebody in the British Thematic Association, and so I don't actually have a stamp from Belgium, but I do have some meter mail from Belgium, so that counts as one of the 97 countries. And there's a number of reasons why I think the Statue of Liberty has appeared on so many stamps and for so many different countries. And one of the reasons is that it's so, and I apologize if there are any graphic designers on the call. I work with a number of graphic designers, and the one thing about graphic designers is they like to cut corners sometimes. They like to use shorthand. And designer shorthand, if you want something that's going to represent the USA, there's nothing really better than the Statue of Liberty. It's a symbol of the, everyone knows what it is, everyone knows where it is. So if you want something that's going to represent America, slap the Statue of Liberty on it. That's the easy way to do it. And obviously the country that's adopted it the most as a symbol is the USA. We're gonna symbol American, Americanness. And what does this mean? So when we want to show things pertaining to the United States of America, or we want to represent what we stand for as Americans, when we want to represent, our country, then, what symbol are we going to use to define ourselves? And they tend to, they use the USA. But it's not just the USA who do that. Other countries do it too. So this was Poland and Spain issuing stamps to mark the 150th anniversary of the US Constitution. And you can see on the Polish one there, in the background, you can see the the Statue of Liberty in the distance. Obviously, that's quite interesting because the Statue of Liberty wasn't there when the US Revolution happened. It arrived quite some time later. So we're not going for historical accuracy here, but hey, we want to represent what the USA looks like. Here we go. And people have used it for treaties and diplomatic links with America. This is there are various different people who've had various visits to America for various different reasons, and often their country issues a stamp to commemorate that. It's not something we do these days because people are flying all over the world all the time. But back in the day, this was quite a big deal, and and so and sometimes you get odd countries commemorating visits of people. Like I'm not quite sure why Rwanda felt the need to put out a set commemorating a papal visit to the United Nations in New York, but they very kindly stuck a Statue of Liberty on there, so it's in the collection. And my favourite one here out of this lot is the Bulgaria. Deciding, well, we're gonna commemorate the visit of Khrushchev to the USA, and we'll stick a big Statue of Liberty on that stamp. You've got a Russian plane coming in or Soviet plane coming in with USSR written on the side, but look, it's the Statue of Liberty. And I do wonder, one day I'm going to try and find out who decided who made that decision to put that symbol of democracy and freedom on a stamp of one of the Warsaw Pact countries. And it does feel quite subversive almost, and that's quite amusing. So 1976 was a special year for me because it was the year I was born, but it also marked the 200th anniversary of the American Declaration of Independence, and countries from all over the world included the Statue of Liberty in their commemorative stamp issues because you want to, again, represent the USA. And these are some pages from a philatelic passport from Interphil, which was held in Philadelphia in 1976. And the Statue of Liberty appears on these stamps, appears on stamps that commemorate the bicentenary. On the left, the stamp from Bangladesh, and on the right, one of the stamps issued by San Marino to commemorate the bicentenary of the USA. Again, something like a philatelic passport. It's actually, I don't really know how you'd go about displaying these, but it's quite an interesting thing to have a look in and see the different sort of postmarks people are using, and also see where stamps end up, really. And then within the USA, obviously, the Statue of Liberty is a massive symbol for New York City. So if people are going to New York for a World's Fair, or if they are both of these sets of stamps actually are for different World's Fairs and different years. If they're going to New York for any other reason, then this would be, almost naturally they're going to go for putting the Statue of Liberty on their stamps, and obviously there are lots of stamp exhibitions in New York City, and these are both stamps that were issued in 1947 for, I think you say that Cypex, maybe you say it Kipex, I'm not sure. Again, another Bulgarian stamp. Look at that, just a couple of years after the Second World War, with the Statue of Liberty on. I mean, Bulgaria, really sort of liked putting the Statue of Liberty on their stamps compared to every other country behind the Iron Curtain. So that's on that one. That was issued especially for this event. This is the and then the Monaco strip. I quite like this strip of 3 stamps. This actually represents the postage cost if you're posting something from Monaco to New York. But I haven't really seen this on any envelope, so I don't know if anyone actually did send anything from Monaco to New York. But if you were going to, this is how much it would cost you. You can do the maths there. It's 35 francs. But they've got that big red image on the left there, which includes the statue and also includes the background, the backdrop of New York, which is a rather nice stamp, actually. I quite like that. A few years later, I've already mentioned Fipex because we had that little postcard we looked at earlier. You got these miniature sheets. These were actually legal postage, and you do find them cut down and used as stamps on envelopes, all kinds of envelopes. I've got several examples of that, and obviously, they were stuck on first day covers and used as well. And you can find these were printed. They must have been printed in their millions because you can find so many of these. And I don't know if everybody realizes that they were actually legal postage, because you find so many stacks of them unused for sale sometimes. but it is quite interesting. I quite like finding these on sort of non-philatelic covers where they've got a miniature sheet and they're obviously desperate for a stamp, and so they've literally gone and they've cut round the stamps and stuck them on. You can find some like that, which is quite amusing. And bringing this a bit more up to date, there was the New York Stamp Show in 2016, which included the Statue of Liberty and the logo for the stamp show. And so there's a lot of philatelic material. The logo on this sheet is on the right hand side there. There's a lot of philatelic material around with that stamp show logo printed on the stamps, and then you get into the question of do you collect all of those because technically they've got the Statue of Liberty on, or do you let that go? And really, that's one of those, I think, questions that we always face as collectors is, well, technically this would fit in my collection, but there's questions of money, and also if it's modern stamps, do I want them in my collection because they don't always look that pretty? I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't be making an aesthetic choice like that. But another thing that designers use stamps for is to talk about foreign travel. So it does appear on a number of airmail stamps, particularly when people were opening up routes flying into New York, flying into the USA. So these are this is from Brazil in 1930. And a few years after 1930, it's hard to make out the date on this, but given that it's got a sensor strip on the left-hand side, obviously we can sort of date it reasonably accurately to a few years after 1930. And this is a commercial cover, obviously sent to the UK, obviously opened by the censor, from Laminex Limited, who are based in Sao Paulo, and it's got 4 of those airmails on it, and they're all tied to the envelope by cancels. And Laminex is still going, or it was still going until recently as a company, and basically it moved into sort of creating plastics, but this is for their razor blade division. So I can't imagine they would have included samples. That seems rather dangerous that you'd stick razor blades in an envelope, but it is quite an interesting sort of slightly weird commercial cover with lots of sort of history involved in it, because you've got kind of the sensor label and everything else. And so that's one of those sort of weird envelopes that you like, but you can't really say why. And obviously it's very tatty. It's been soaked at some point, in the sense that it's got wet rather than anyone trying to soak the stamps off. So you do wonder if there was some problem on the journey. Maybe a mailbag fell off the wrong side of the boat or something. I don't know. This is a stamp from. This is a cover, commemorating the first flight from Marseille to New York, and I quite like this because you've got that kind of cachet on the left, which is very prominent. It's as if the Statue of Liberty is just the only thing you can see. You can't see anything behind it. Can't see the city or anything. And what I really liked about this as well is that obviously you got the Statue of Liberty on the stamp, and then they've managed to smack the cancel in a perfect circle around her. I don't think they could. I hope. I don't know if they planned that. I hope they did, because I'd be amazed if they could get it that accurate by accident. But it's one of those nice covers that you just you get a lot of these, and you get a lot of these sort of cachets as well with the statue in, sort of like on a philatelic item like that. But for me, this is one where you've got the cachet, but you've also got it on the stamp, so it's a little bit better than just buying something because of the design on the envelope. Again, another more recent example of foreign travel. This was the Royal Mail Post and Go first day cover from 2015. This is what I mean about, if you're going to do sort of things from around the world, you're going to end up using the Statue of Liberty. It's as famous as the Sydney Opera House. It's as famous as the canals in Venice. It's as famous as the White Cliffs of Dover. If you want to represent different parts of the world, you're going to include the Statue of Liberty in it. So there's lots of examples of this, of sets where you've perhaps got 5 or 6 stamps in the set, and they're all different world landmarks, and they will include the Statue of Liberty. So I'm not going to show you all of these because obviously you guys have a life. You've probably got other things to do this evening, but these are examples of all the topics and themes that have used the Statue of Liberty. So it's been used to represent democracy, it's been used to represent human rights, it's been used to represent patriotism, it's been used to represent peace, racial equality. There were a lot of stamps issued post 9/11 under a theme called United We Stand, which was an anti-terrorism issue. And again, lots of random countries issuing almost identical sheets, but with slight different variations on it. And then obviously for international events, the World's Fairs I've already mentioned, but the FIFA World Cup in 1994, if anyone collects soccer stamps, there were several stamps issued in 1994, and a few countries that when they produced their stamps included the Statue of Liberty. So there's lots of reasons. I picked two more reasons to show you, and this is where I'm just going to check the chat and see. Somebody guessed the US number 566 1925 as the first stamp to feature the Statue of Liberty. It's a good guess, but it's not correct. So one of the symbols, one of the things the Statue of Liberty is used as a symbol of is a symbol of peace. And hang on a second. And here we go. This set was released by Uruguay to celebrate the end of World War I. So this was released in 1919. These are actually the first stamps to feature the Statue of Liberty on the actual stamp. So I did say they were American. Didn't tell you where in America. South American, but that is a great bit of trivia. If you're running, you can't do it in your own society, but if you're ever off anywhere running a stamp quiz, you see if anybody knows their Uruguayan stamps. Which country was the first to issue stamps featuring the Statue of Liberty? The Marshall Islands one that's superimposed over the top there, that was released to mark the UN International Year of Peace in 1986. And because it was the United Nations International Year of Peace, and because it was the centennial of the Statue of Liberty, and because the Republic of the Marshall Islands decided they were going to be really clever and combine the two, you get this rather nice image of the Statue of Liberty with a flower garland in her hair, which is quite creative. And I think those are flowers that are native to the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So it's a nice sort of way of illustrating peace. And this leads on nicely to the opposite, really, which is that the Statue of Liberty is also used as a symbol of patriotism. And this is an interesting cover, obviously being sold to raise funds for something. Got a US Navy postmark, but I'm not sure where. It was postmarked. It was stamped. You've got the Statue of Liberty there, and obviously that's from the series that came out in the early 1940s. I think it was 1941. With the Statue of Liberty on the 1 cent stamp, and then a massive cannon on the 2 cent stamp. And this design, without freedom, liberty dies. And a very kind of almost a contemporary slogan, really. I mean, people kind of are saying stuff about liberty and freedom now. It goes to show it's been used for a long time, that particular sort of slogan. And I think the juxtaposition of these two themes just shows that this sort of iconic statue, it can be used in very different ways. It can be used for both to promote peace, but also to promote patriotism in wartime. And that, for me, I find that quite interesting. There's that juxtaposition. As a final thing, not a final thing, but just as a final sort of like funny thing, you'd think that you couldn't mistake the Statue of Liberty for anything else. But some of you will know this story. Back in 2011, the US Postal Service used a photo of a replica of the Statue of Liberty. It's a replica that appears outside the New York Casino in Las Vegas. It was a photo which they decided to stick on a stamp and tell everyone it was the Statue of Liberty. And then somebody said, yeah, that ain't the Statue of Liberty. How embarrassing for them. So this is not the Statue of Liberty. This is a copy that's in this photo. And they actually got into a second pile of trouble because they used this photo without actually getting the permission of the photographer, and they ended up getting sued. So that's a mistake on many levels, really, just behind this stamp. And you might look at that and think that's a fairly innocuous stamp. It's not particularly exciting. You know, it's an all right first day of issue cover. It's not particularly amazing, but then behind that stamp there's this kind of weird story of the US Post Office getting it really wrong with that. And I think, I don't know how much the photographer got for the fact that they used his photo without paying for it, but I imagine they ended up paying him more than if they just bought the photo to start with. Now, I did say I was going to talk about some of my personal connections with the Statue of Liberty. And these are a couple of items in my collection. Don't know if we've got any postcard collectors on the call, but these are a couple of postcards. So the one on the right, the one in the centre there, is the one that my wife sent to me when she visited the statue back, a couple of years before I visited it. And like I said, that was one of the prompts for me wondering how many stamps I have featuring the Statue of Liberty. The other one, with the slight decal edge there, that was actually sent by my wife's uncle back to his mum, my wife's grandma, several years before, just to say hi, in New York. And we found this while sorting through my wife's grandma's house, and I said to her uncle, "Oh, do you mind? Can I keep this?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." I didn't even know that she still had that. So that was a sort of a nice little addition to the collection. It reminds me of my wife's family, and it's quite nice to have those things sometimes in your collection when they actually fit. Obviously, these would be even better if they had Statue of Liberty stamps on the back of the postcard, but I don't think they were selling any when my wife was visiting, and obviously, you've got no say over it. Have you really? You've got to use the stamps that are available at the time. And then a little bit of backstory to the another personal connection. So obviously, for many millions of Americans, the Lady Liberty lifted her lamp above the golden door, which is the phrase that's inscribed on her base. And it was the first sight of America for many families seeking a better life in the New World. And these stamps were issued by San Marino in 2001. They depict San Marini's emigration to the New World. And you've got there the people standing presumably on the edge of a boat, looking over the railing and seeing the Statue of Liberty in the background. It's a very small element in the stamp. And it's also included on the official sort of cover commemorating Irish emigration to America, issued, which was a joint issue between Ireland and the USA. Again, the statue is not on the stamp here, but it is on the official Irish Post release. And obviously, there were a huge number of people who emigrated from Ireland to America as well. There are actually more people living in the USA who identify as Irish than the current population of Ireland. So that's one of those bizarre factoids of life, isn't it? But another person who went to the New World was my great uncle, Robert Bostock. And in 1905, Robert left the village of Brumbo near Wrexham in North Wales to seek his fortune in America. And he traveled on a ship called the Oceanic. And a few years ago, my dad was visiting New York City and went to Ellis Island in New York Harbor, which is where the Oceanic docked. And he looked up the arrivals logs, which are all there for you to look through. And he found Robert's name and the details of him landing in New York. So Robert then traveled inland to Mahoney City in Pennsylvania. I know that because it's written on the back of this photo. So that's where this photo was taken. He took this photo and he mailed it home to his sister, my great grandma. And from Mahoney City, he made his way to Los Angeles, where he worked for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Agency. And a couple of years later, in 1908, he got married. He and his wife had 2 children. And then he passed away in 1932 at the age of 54. And his grave is somewhere in Los Angeles. One day I'll have to go and find it, perhaps. But it's quite interesting. I mean, as I did some research into Robert, I found out that I've seen a lot of these photos that were in the family archive, and including his wedding photo and the photos of the kids he sent back home. And of course, none of his relatives ever met his wife or his family or his children. They never went to visit him, because you'd have had to go by ship, or it was just inconceivable really for people to travel by plane such a distance. He never came back to the UK. So he literally got on a boat and he went to the new world, and he never saw any of his family again, which is quite astonishing really. I find that quite moving. But one of the things we got in our archive, along with the various photos of Robert and his family, is this postcard that he sent back. Obviously, one of the first sights he would have had of America, if he was landing at Ellis Island, unless it was thick fog, would have been the Statue of Liberty. And this postcard he sent back on the 23rd of May, 1917. He's written on the front, "The good old American flag." And if you look just beside the flag there is the Statue of Liberty in the background. So this fits nicely in with my collecting theme. This is in the family photo album. It's not in my philatelic display, but I thought you'd like to see it. And for me, it's one of those things of a connection with my collection. That he's one of those sort of slightly unexpected, because like I said, it was only going through those old family photo albums. I had a good squint at that, and I thought, wow, that's the Statue of Liberty on that stamp. And when I turned it over, we find a message to his sister, my great grandma, talking about the fact that America had entered the First World War. He actually did join up in 1918. He would have been sort of a bit older, well, certainly an older sort of soldier then, to be a soldier then rather. But he joined up, I think probably because he thought, well, I'm going to go home and protect my old homeland. I mean, he had become an American citizen by that point. He never saw service, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately for him, he never got a chance to come over to Europe. He was discharged a few months later, and he went back to his previous job selling insurance. So that's some of my personal connections to my collection. I hope you find this interesting. I realize I've talked really fast. You may have some questions. I'm very happy to answer them all. And that's the end of my presentation.
Well, first of all, can I ask, has anybody got any questions you would like to ask John? No, you're all sitting bamboozled and. No.
Sorry, it's a lot of information to take in, isn't it?
Well, it was absolutely fascinating, because as you say, it was a collection of the Statue of Liberty with a little bit of personal information in beside it. And I haven't been to that part of America at all, but I'm quite sure it must have a big impact on a lot of people who have had relatives who have gone into America in the past, and many, many people did, as you said. So a fascinating display, John. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Loved all the little anecdotes that went along with it. So would everybody please like to join me in thanking John for showing us his wonderful display? Thank you. Usual way.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure being here.
Yes, and I will no doubt see you on the BTA site in future.
Yes, I'm not sure when the next BTA Zoom is, but no. I should plug those and say they are open. You don't have to be a member of the BTA.
Shall we say a number of members? We have got quite a few members of the CALI who are also members of Glasgow Thematic. So I have persuaded lots of people to join. So thank you very much, John. Can I say that next week our meeting is a face-to-face meeting in the Renfield Centre, and we are having a visit from Lanarkshire Philatelic Society, hopefully. Thank you, Andy. And the meetings actually start as usual at 7:30, but as we have the hall from about 6 o'clock-ish, after we have set up the boards, we do plan to have a bourse from about 6:30 till about 7:30 when the Lanarkshire people arrive, or they could even arrive and join in the bourse as well. So Thank you very much for being here this evening, everyone. And do take care, keep safe, and see you next week, possibly. Although I think I'm going to be self-isolating because I'm going to Switzerland the week after. Thank you, everybody. Night, night.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye,